Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the worst books that I read last year. And I'm mostly going to be talking about disappointments. I think there is maybe just one book that I read that I was like, this was not a good book. But other than that, I think I read really good books last year. And this list is mostly full of disappointments. So books that I think maybe I did like them, but they just didn't reach like the highs that I was expecting out of them. So yeah, let's just wait. I need to take out my notes. Okay, so let's just start with the first one, which is going to be La Cresta de Ilion, which is Iliac's Crest, I think the translation, what it's called, by Cristina Rivera. And this is the first book that I read by this Mexican author. I was so excited to read this book. The premise is fascinating, and I think that is what made me like so hyped. And so I was like thinking this is going to be easily a 5 stars. The story starts with a stormy night, as all good books do, and you follow a man that is in his house alone, and he hears a knock on the door, and he opens, and this mysterious woman enters his house, and she basically just starts living in there with him. And there's this other woman that like soon after joins. The story was sold to me as a kind of these two women questioning the man unrelentlessly about his identity, and there was supposed to be a lot of like exploration about sexual orientation and just him, like who he thought he was. And that is not at all what we got. Unfortunately, there is a lot of like philosophizing, and this guy is just thinking a lot about his job, and there's not enough, I think, interactions between these women and him. I mean, the book is quite short, but I don't know. I think from what the book reads at the back, I was thinking this kind of like interrogatory kind of book that was just a long conversation. And there are a couple of like one-liners that these women just, especially one of them, whisper kind of into the ear of the guy, these questions that send him a bit into like a spiral. So it is more or less what how the story is described, but I don't know. I think based on those kind of short, punctual questions that they mostly say to him at the start of the book, I was expecting kind of a whirlwind of deconstruction for this guy, and unfortunately it was not that. So I think this is just a disappointment, because I was very excited to read anything by this Mexican author, but also because based on the premise I was expecting a 5-star, and this was just not there. The second one is a completely different story, and this is unfortunately Dust of Dreams, which is book 9 in Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson. I recently talked about book 10 being the favorite or one of the favorite reads of 2025, and definitely I mean, those last pages are definitely seared into my mind forever. But book 9 was just not very exciting. I think after 8 books, 8 like huge chunkers, you go into book 9 knowing like you're close to the end. I knew that it was a single, like book 9 and 10 are actually a single book divided in two, which I think is something that has never worked. I'm thinking mostly about films that are split like this. I don't think I had read books that had been like split into part 1, part 2. And I mean, they are technically like different, like separate books, but they are meant to be read as a single one. And that's actually what I did and what people recommend. And it's mostly because a lot of the threads and plot points that are open in book 9 are obviously closed in book 10. But I just felt like book 9 had a lot of walking and talking and philosophizing. And this is something that I think is a bit of a problem with the second half of Malazan Book of the Fallen, like at large. But I think this book in particular was more disappointing, because you are you're getting to the end of the story. You want to have like catharsis for so many characters and so many plot lines that you've followed, and instead of that, you get a lot of walking, a lot of talking, and just in general, like the military side of this military fantasy story is not like my favorite. So this book in particular has a lot of that, like the soldering. So I think, yeah, I definitely think it could have been uh, like cut down or edited down. I think books 9 and 10 should have been a single book. I think that would have made a much better story. What else can I say? Book 9 has probably the darkest moment in all of Malatan, which is incredible to say because this is a dark series for sure, and there is a lot of pain and violence that is kind of inflicted on people all the time. It feels kind of relentless with its punishment, but there is a story that is so tragic and almost like repugnant to read, something that happens to a woman. And yeah, I don't know, I think there are moments like this and a couple others in book 9 that were like standouts, both in good and bad ways. But I think overall book 9 just felt a bit too long, too like meandering, and I wish that because we were at the end, either that it had been edited down so that book 9 and 10 had been a single book. I think that would have been a much like punchier, tight narrative for the end of this series. Or if it was going to be split into two, that we used maybe a lot of the page time that we had on the soldering and maybe develop further even the same plot lines that we follow in books 9 and 10. I know some of the other plot lines were not meant to be finished in this story, so I'm not saying that we could have used it for other things, but even just with what we have in 9 and 10, maybe just developing those further. I don't know. That is just what it is. um, the next one is also a fantasy book, and this is Blood Over Bright Haven by Emil Wang. And this is also the first book that I read by her. And I was just very disappointed because people were saying that this was so good. A lot of people were saying it was as good or even better than The Sword of Kaigen, even though these are completely different books. And I think what was disappointing to me was that the story was just like too predictable. I think the first chapter is amazing, and I think everyone talks about that. It throws you into the story, like you're in the moment. People are running from this plague that is kind of attacking people randomly, basically, and they are just like running, and eventually they erupt in a ball of flame and fire, and they disintegrate, and these people are running for the safety of this city. And the story kind of continues from there, and you follow a scientist that she's the first woman that has been able to like pass the exam and become like a magician in this male dominated school or like institution of magic and science research, whatever. And so you follow a lot of her struggles and like her fight against patriarchy. So I think the themes are there, and I think I'm glad that this story has resonated so much with people. But I just felt like I kind of predicted correctly the kind of the key to the world building that unlocks the story towards the end from like page 2. So that was not very fun. And then I think a lot of what happens towards the end is a bit of like the typical kind of like fantasy endings that you expect from this story. But I mean, this is what is it called? Dark Academia, which is not my kind of main genre. So maybe it has to do with that. But I don't know. I think I was expecting something a bit more nuanced, and unfortunately, I found this story to be quite like predictable, quite standard, as in not taking any like huge narrative risks. Kind of the typical like fight patriarchy narrative, which is very important, and we need them. And I'm good that it exists, and I'm good that maybe younger people will find a lot of resonance with this story and this heroine. But yeah, just maybe not as good as I was expecting.
Hello, editing JP here. Of course, I forgot about my emoji thing in the first video of the year. But if you want to let me know that you are here, just leave a door emoji, and the reason why will become clear by the end of the video.
And then the last but not least It's going to be Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie, the third book in the Age of Madness, and the last book in this trilogy. And yeah, this was probably out of all of these my biggest disappointment, just because I was loving the trilogy so far up to that moment. Especially like book two made it to the best books of last year for me. So this was obviously an amazing story, and a story that I was really into, like the characters and everything. But I think with how much people in booktube build up the Age of Madness as like the best grimdark, or like the best epic fantasy, or maybe not epic but like adult fantasy, alongside other stories. I'm not saying this is like the only one. I don't know, I was just expecting more. And I think the thing that like single-handedly disappointed me the most was the lack of connection between like this story and things that were set up in the first Law trilogy and the standalones. Uh, I think in comparison to those previous books, this Age of Madness trilogy felt so isolated, so like small scope, small scale, um, way less magical, which I think is part of the evolution of the world, like the loss of magic and the industrialization of the world. So that is not necessarily like a fault of the book. I think that is kind of what the project is trying to do. But the it's weird to say, because First Law is not known for being like the most like magic heavy fantasy book, but I just love the connection between like magic and the world, and especially because it's so like mystical and so like alien to everyone, that I think those kind of small pockets of magic that we get are always amazing. And they always kind of help push the story so much. And here I think we just went back to kind of humans being humans, and they are very interesting characters that we follow. And I think the conclusion is satisfying if we only look kind of short sighted at what's happening in this city. But there were so many threads that I had like theories for and like predictions for. And I thought like, okay, if Abercrombie does this with this kind of faction that he started putting together in the standalones, or even things that happen in the first Law trilogy, that I was like, we didn't get resolution, but I know that this is gonna like come back in Age of Madness. And like everyone thought that they had dealt with this problem by just locking it away, without saying any spoilers. And then like that never showed up, and I was like, that was so meant to be kind of a callback to the first trilogy, or something that would teach people that you cannot just like lock away issues and then not expect them to stab them in the back later. um, there are powers in this world that are not addressed at all towards the end, and I just felt like it needed more development. I needed more books. I think I needed the world to open more, and open as much as we had opened it previously. I also have like other critiques about the queer arc of the only character that we have, or like the only, I would say, openly queer, or like clearly queer character that is also a major character. I had a lot of complaints about how that was dealt. So yeah, what can I say? Wisdom of Crowds really let me down. I still enjoy it. I want to make clear that, I mean, I think I gave it like maybe 4 stars. So I think it was a good book. But I think based on the promise and everything that I had been reading 8 previous books up to that point. It was not the end of the First Law, like 9-book series that I was expecting to have. Anyways, I don't want to put this down more, but I'm just gonna move on quickly to what I would say was the worst book that I read last year, and that is unfortunately Giovanni's Room. This is a piece of classic queer fiction, a very important, I would say, piece of fiction, because he was probably one of the first like openly queer books that were published and like a mass success. It was also written by a black man, so like there's intersectionality there. Even though actually the main character is white, and that was like a choice. I think that the main character, I think that was a fair choice. Like he didn't want to unpack at the time. There was like writing a gay, like an openly gay story, and publishing that and making that published was probably hard enough that he didn't want to touch the intersectionality with being also a man of color. So I can understand why he did that. Maybe if he was alive right now, he would have written that differently. Um, but yeah, I think this is also a story that we discussed in a local book club. So it was I was kind of surprised by how much people loved this book and how everyone connected emotionally, and how people praised the relationship between the main character and Giovanni. Whereas I feel like I read a different book. I feel like I did not see any of that connection that they had. And for a book called Giovanni's Room, I expected, I think, to see more of them interacting kind of in private. I wanted to see more how they dealt with their queerness in a world where, I mean, because these are like middle to upper class men, there are a lot of societal pressures on them, and I think we never got to see any of that kind of exploration, or even their own, unpacking what it means to be a gay man in Paris at the time for them, and like questioning, or like, I don't know. I think the emotional side of it was completely missing for me. I did not see, or at least I think a lot of things happened off page, or people were like reading into it, or people, because like this is such a popular book, and we all have our own experiences, and we have read other like queer stories. I think when you go back and read these classics, you project a lot of what we've seen and heard and experienced and consumed into this story, and I just feel like there was just not that much in there to support the fact that these men cared for each other. So anyways, complete like emotional disconnect. And then I think the main character was just like a good for nothing kind of boy, a rich privileged guy that got to move to Paris with like his parents' money, and like he's not working, he's not doing anything, he's just like taking people like money from other people, and like woe is me. I think, I don't know if that is like a popular complaint, but I think this book is like the peak version of like woe is me. Uh, and it's so much worse because this guy is like privileged, and I mean he has like money, and he's also being so cruel to his girlfriend, and to his friend Giovanni, and he's just a despicable man. Like I did not like him at all. I was not necessarily expecting like a romance story and how like they make this fantasy of a world in their room where they can be themselves. But I would have liked exploring a bit more what it felt like for them, for these two men to be in a gay relationship at the time, uh, what it meant for their like insecurities and their own histories, what it meant like for the support they could give each other. And I think instead of all of that, we just got so much like drama and pain, and people being horrible to each other. So I don't know if I missed the point, but I just feel like this book was not what people were saying it was in terms of like the delicacy, and or like the, I don't know. I feel like people just romanticize a lot of the pain that is portrayed in the story, and then they like put in, uh, or like imagine that there was actually some kind of connection or romance there. Um, but yeah, uh, basically that is everything. I'm happy that you're here. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments what were some of the worst books that you read in 2025. If you read any of these that I mentioned, did you like them? Did you also not like them? Just let me know in the comments, and yeah, have a great day. Bye bye.